But I can't find it. So I'm just going to ask whether or not you go into consideration of whether your cultural reason as to why. Are you asking me?
Our minds think alike. We're just working in unison. Now I'm going to leave that.
Leave it,
All stands. The Coronial Court now stands resumed. Please be seated.
Sergeant, I was asking you just before the break some questions about your thought processes as you are on the plane flying to Yuendamu. Your Honour, just before I continue examining, I just wanted to confirm, really for the benefit of the parties, that I don't propose to play any of the two videos that we were given this morning. I think it's appropriate that police legal have a look at them. I don't think there'll be an issue, but there's a process and we'll respect it. Now, at some point during your flight, am I correct that you started drafting a concept for Acting Commander Gill?
That's correct.
What is a concept?
So concept is basically you don't have confirmed information on what you're trying to achieve, but you have limited information, but you're trying to, in that case there, I was providing to provide Acting Commander Gill an understanding of where I was coming from and what my intentions were. So he would know what I was trying to do, and then if he had any issues with that, he could feed back and say, look, no, yes, no, otherwise.
I might just throw the concept up on the screen for a moment. Beck, if we could have document 7-77, it's Appendix A. It's Appendix A. I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what page. It's after the body of the statement. You might need to scroll through it.
I've got it, yeah.
It's page 16, I think. You're welcome to follow along on paper, but I'll just throw it up on the screen so the parties can see.
Yep.
Perhaps while that's occurring, I'll just ask you some questions about the document. You've got a copy in front of you. Now, the document is an email that you sent to Sean Gill at 1:12 a.m.
That's correct.
And I'm correct, aren't I, that that was when you first received or got reception as you were circling over Catherine, is that right?
Yeah, so when we took off, I started drafting that on my phone, and then I just had to wait to an opportunity where I got reception. I think it was over Catherine, or I think it may even be, what was the time, 1:12, I'll probably say closer to Tennant Creek, when I got reception and I sent that through.
Beck, can we scroll down slightly? Sergeant, you can see that on the document you state the location, Yuendamu, you state the situation, you state your mission,
Yep.
which you describe as preventing serious harm to any person. And then the next heading is execution.
Yes.
And you say, on arrival, liaise with PFC, Police Forward Commander, and establish the following. So is it fair to say that even before you landed on the ground, you were identifying information that you would need once you hit the ground to make a risk assessment and go forward?
Yes, and it's also to provide Acting Commander Gill that I'm thinking of those things to give him some confidence in what my plan was and what happened, because I might get down there and we might lose communications, for whatever reason, and he could brief up that that he was happy that I had a good understanding of what my role was and what we were going to do.
Brett, can we have the next page, please? Over onto the next page, you have task 1, which is establish safe zone at the police station.
Yes.
And then there are some bullet points, a couple of lines down. You say develop actions at Station 4, hostile crowd, fire, lethal threat, i.e. firearm, non-lethal threat, i.e. rocks, projectiles, injury / man down. Now, are those things that you knew had happened, or were they contingencies?
The basic contingencies that if we got onto the ground and those things happened, I wanted everyone, all police, to understand what we were going to do and how we were going to respond to them.
So I take it that your sincere hope would have been that those things wouldn't happen.
Oh, of course, yes.
But you had to turn your mind to what you would do if they did happen.
Yes.
All right. Upon arrival, can you tell her Honour what state you found the Yuendumu police station in?
At the police station?
Yes.
Yeah, so once we landed at the police station, I walked in, I saw Kumanjayi was still in the watch house, or laying where he was laying, and I wasn't aware, or as far as I was aware, he was actually gone. The members looked pretty, I wouldn't say shattered, but they were definitely uneased, in an uneasy state, and they were definitely relieved that once we walked in, they could see some relief. And then, of course, when I spoke to or saw Sergeant Frost, she was, you could see that she was heavily affected by the situation.
In what way was she affected?
You try to talk to her, you could just see her that she was upset. Just when you look at someone, you can just tell straight away they're not coping. And I think that she was also a bit relieved once we started speaking to her. Once I started talking to her, I couldn't get good, clear communication from her. I said, where are we up to, what are we doing? And she was a bit all over the place. And that's where I grabbed her and Zhang, we went off to a room, and I sat down and said, right, let's start from the beginning. What's going on?
And did you have a sense of why she was in the state she was in?
I had been told that they'd been fatigued due to the workload, so I was aware of that before we left, so I was taking into account the fatigue of that, plus it was 1:30 in the morning I think we arrived, so it's already early, and the fact of what's happened, anyone in that position will be under an incredible amount of stress.
Tell me about the perceptions of Sergeant Zhang.
I've never met Terry before till that time, and I sat down with him, and I was clear to him what his role and what I was there to be there to support him. And he said, yep, he was looking for some guidance and stuff. I asked, have you ever been to any incidents like this before? Have you undertaken the forward commander role before? Have you been to anything that's obviously not as serious as this, because we hadn't had a police shooting in 17 years involving a death. Then when we started having the teleconference with Darwin, I encouraged him to take notes heavily, because he was a little bit unsure how to do it. And I said to him, I can't recall what I said to you before the conversation or not. I said, this is the biggest thing this organisation has seen in 17 years. You need to be conscious of the fact that everything we do right now is going to be looked upon from everyone, right from this point to management, right to the coroners and the families. We have to show effective leadership. We have to show effective control. And if any stage you don't know where you're going, what you're doing, ask me. If you think you're not happy with me, tell me. So I was just trying to let him know the seriousness of it all, what we had to do, and we had a lot of work to do to get on top of it.
You've given evidence that you asked him some questions about his level of experience.
Yeah.
What were his answers?
I think he said, no, I've never done this. I think he was a shift supervisor in Alice Springs at the time. I can't recall. But there's nothing that gave me, oh, good, I've got a guy who's been exposed to some of this. Straight away, I knew that he was probably unprepared, just pure lack of experience.
I think you're very quite commendably saying in your statement that these observations were in no way a criticism of him. He had the experience he had. But it was your expectation as you were approaching Yuendumu that you might have a more experienced police forward commander, given the seriousness of the incident?
Yes.
Who did you think that might be?
I asked where the senior sergeant in charge of that region was, and he was doing another task. I asked where the superintendent of the region was, and obviously that was Superintendent Ops coordinating resources back. And to be honest, I was a little bit, I don't want to say disappointed, but a little bit surprised with the seriousness of what we had, why we hadn't sent someone out more senior to control that. And I'm not aware of the impulse of organisational requirements back in Alice Springs, so I can't comment on that. But I did expect someone of a high rank, and especially when I spoke to Terry and he said, look, I have to go tomorrow because I think he was going on leave. He says, okay, that's fine, I'm happy with that, but that means I had to get another forward commander coming, which I would have to brief, train up and then build on with. And who was to say where would we be in 2 hours to 24 hours?
You also gave evidence that you saw the body of Kumanjayi Walker.
Yes.
Was that a surprise to you?
Yes, it was.
Why?
I didn't think he was there. My understanding was he had been, I think in my notes, I was informed he was being taken to the clinic. So I wasn't aware that the health staff had evacuated. And I would assume that he would have been taken back in the plane or would have been removed. So.
Did it change your perception of what needed to happen next, knowing that Kumanjayi was still there?
It changed the priorities, I guess. As soon as I saw that the body was there, my next question was, do the family know that he's here? And do they know he's deceased? And they said no and no. And I said, right, that changes. And then I started questioning what's our strategy to inform them when we're doing the rest of it. And we obviously went down that path. But my fear was if they knew he was there and they knew he was deceased, they would want to come and see him. And I knew we did not want to do that. So it's all like changed my priorities on what we're doing and how we're going to respond.
Why didn't you want the family to see Kumanjayi's body?
If they're going to go and see him in the station, they're going to get extremely emotional. And I've been to numerous incidents where we've had to pass death messages for Aboriginal people who have died through riots, search and rescue incidents. When they get emotional, then they can get aggression comes in. And if we were in the police station and that emotion was overcome through to potential aggression, then it'll get deflected straight onto us in a controlled environment where we couldn't handle it. I just didn't want them to be in the station to start with to see that. I didn't want them coming to the station demanding to see him for cultural reasons, obviously, for the smoking and whatnot, which I knew we would do later on. So it was a difficult decision because I had to provide some advice to them in relation to cultural awareness and cultural significance to the fact that we had a body of deceased person to be involved in a police shooting. Forensics are extremely important to do that sort of thing as well, and I didn't want to compromise anything for a potential investigation that may be coming.
During the briefing with Sergeant Zhang and Sergeant Frost, you note that you were informed that Kumanjayi's grandfather was Eddie Robertson.
That's correct.
And that he had links to Canberra and that they were worried about potential interference. Can you explain, as best you can recall, what they told you?
I think they said he was a Prime Minister and Cabinet representative for Yuendamu. And I said, okay. And I asked about his standing in the community and was he the viable person to speak to, and everyone told me he was our point of contact. It wasn't a concern. It was definitely a consideration. We have had political interference from Canberra before, for instance, in communities in Darwin, especially at Port Keats, when incident I was involved in about 2012. And I was just conscious of the fact that we were still trying to work out how we were going to respond, and Eddie may ring Canberra and say he wasn't happy with police or happy with anything else, which then would provide potentially some communication to our leadership, then back to me, which could be another, not so much a hindrance, but another consideration I would have to take on when I already got so much work to do to start with. I didn't see it as an immediate issue, but I could definitely see it as a potential issue in the days to come. And it was just something it's just more of an awareness.
Did you also have a conversation with Sergeant Zhang about chain of command and what you would do if you weren't getting clear directions from your superiors back in Alice Springs or Darwin?
Yes.
And what did you say?
So when I arrived, Sergeant Zhang told me that Superintendent Nobbs wanted to talk to us, and I said, he can wait. I need to find out what's going on. I had an impression of what was happening. I've just walked in and seen Kumanjayi on the station, so everything before what I had changed, and I need to understand where we're at, what we're doing. And he says he really wants to talk to us. I said, it doesn't matter. I said, Terry, you're in charge. We are running this. It's all for us. No one else is coming. We have no resources coming till tomorrow. We need to get on top of this as quickly as we can to instill leadership in our troops, leadership in the community, and how we're going to respond. And I said, we can talk to him in a minute. And then, of course, he rang again and someone knocked on the door and said, you want to talk? I said, cool. And I could see that Terry was getting a little bit frustrated from both ends. Said, all right, let's talk to him. and let's see what they want to do. And I know they were desperate to get some information that we were on the ground and what my intentions were, and I acknowledged that. And I said to Terry, let's talk to them, and if it gets too much, we'll just say to them, stop, and we'll take control.
I'll ask you some questions now about that telephone call. You say it occurred at 2:06 a.m. in the morning.
If my statement says it, yes.
Yes, 12. And I think you say that Sergeant Zhang answered the phone from Superintendent Nobbs.
Yes.
And that on the telephone conference with you, in addition to Sergeant Zhang and yourself, were Acting Assistant Commissioner Wurst,
Yes.
Acting Deputy Commissioner White,
Yes.
and Superintendent Warren Jackson.
Yes, yeah.
Was Julie Frost also a part of this telephone call?
Yes. Well, she was in the room with me.
Now, one of the videos that you identified for me this morning, body-worn videos, is in fact a body-worn recording of this conversation. Is that correct?
Correct.
I don't want to play it for you now, but can you tell Her Honour why you turned your body-worn video on?
I think it was important to recount all the instructions and communication between us and Darwin and with Superintendent Nobbs in Alice Springs at that time. It was like an appreciation process I did back in Darwin. Before I left, we got there, they were telling us what they knew, we were telling us what we knew, and a step forward. So it was just a basic, to record the decision making at that time, which would affect how we would respond.
You set out in the relevant passage of your statutory declaration a couple of bullet points of what was discussed. That's paragraph 12. I want to ask you about two of them. The first is there was a plan to respond to a confrontation at the station. Can you recall whether you were discussing a contingency, what you would do if there was a confrontation, or whether you were discussing something that was already happening?
I think we were talking about if the confrontation, if the people came to the station, how we would respond.
Can you recall whether there was already a crowd at that point?
There was no one when we arrived, no.
Why were you discussing that contingency if there was no one at the station at that point?
Well, they'd been at the station that evening, and I'd asked Julie how that went and how it worked, and she said that Akbar Williams did an outstanding job in communicating with the community, and I asked where he fit into it all. And I said, if they come back again, how are we going to engage with that? And she wasn't as confident. And then I said, well, if they find out Kumanjayi is deceased and he is in the station, then that could escalate heavily.
And what was your plan?
The plan was obviously communication to start with, to try and engage them and find out what they wanted to know. We discussed on the phone with the Assistant Commissioner Wurst about whether we would tell them, and the thing was, no, we won't tell them that he's deceased. We'll go along with the line that he potentially in Alice Springs. I can't recall, I have to listen to the body worn. But there were pros and cons to both, but the thing was we would just engage with them first, and then if we couldn't engage with them, we would say, you can stay at the front, we'll be out and tell you what to do, which case we go back, ring up high to Darwin and say, look, they're here, they were demanding answers, what's our course of action now? If it turned violent, then we came up with some strategies on how we could potentially push them back away from the station to try and prevent that violence where the harm to police officers could occur.
The other bullet point was when to tell the community. I think you've already covered that off.
Yep.
But is it fair to say that the decision was made by Acting Assistant Commissioner Wurst not to tell the family at 2:06 in the morning?
I'd have to look at the body worn. I think it was almost a unanimous decision. I was against anyone being told that Kumanjayi died before the body was removed. And I may have had an influence on Terry's decision making in that potentially. But I know that Superintendent Nobbs and Assistant Commissioner Wurst discussed it, and we just had as a collective group. And I think we were all pretty much in a unanimous decision at that time that it was the best course of action at that time to do.
Can I just ask that statement be put back up on the screen? In your statement, Sergeant, at paragraph 20, discuss the need to plan for Eddie Robertson to view Kumanjayi's body. And you began cleaning the Sally Port for that purpose.
Yes.
Beck, could we please have annexure B, which I think you'll find at page 18. It'll be on the next page. One more. Here we go. Now, can we go down a little bit? All right. You agree this is an email from yourself to Knox, Poppy and Warren Jackson at 3:52 a.m.
Yes.
And you advise them that the body is ready to go, and then provide a concept.
Yes.
Correct? Yes. And what you're effectively advising them is that the body is being moved to the Sally Port to be placed on a mattress for viewing by Eddie Robertson.
That's good.
Can I ask you, what had changed in your mind that made it safe enough to allow Eddie Robertson to see the body at that point in time?
I think it was probably the discussions with Mr. Nobbs and Mr. Worst, and even to Julie, that they felt that he was in a good position to see the body, and there was a big push for identification. They wanted to make sure to ID Kumanjayi was actually the person they went to arrest, because we always try to seek independent viewing from family, for regardless. So I think that I queried, would Eddie be like to go back and tell everybody and wake everybody up that now he's deceased, or do you think he'll be on side and working with police to form a best strategy of how he would inform the community? And they gave me advice to the latter.
I want to ask you now about some conversations that you had the next morning. The first of those conversations, I think, was at house 577. Do you know the house numbers?
Is that the house where we informed the mother or the family that Keisha was, that he was deceased? Yes. Yep.
At that point in time, do you know whether the family members were all aware that Kumanjayi had passed away?
I highly suspected they didn't. We only told Eddie, and Eddie said he wouldn't tell anyone else, so I suspected no.
Did Eddie ask you to inform the rest of the family?
Yeah, so when Eddie came to the police station and Sergeant Zhang and I spoke with him, we talked about the best strategy to do it. He wasn't comfortable going forward and pass that message, which is totally understandable. I asked if he could come and at least help assist if any language barriers were there, and also to give us any indication as to whether the death message will be... We understood there'll be obviously emotion, but whether that emotion could turn to anger to say, look, you guys need to go. You've told it, you need to go. So we wanted the heads up. So we asked Eddie to come along for that.
Do you know where Akbar Williams was at around about that time?
No, I don't.
Do you know if any consideration was given to taking him to inform?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. So we spoke about that during the night, and there was some concern as to whether Akbar Williams was at risk. So we tried ringing him, he wouldn't answer. I sent a TRG team to knock him on the door to inform him that Kumanjayi had died, and whether he was safe where he was and how he felt. He said he was fine, he was happy. The next morning there was some discussion about taking him with us. I wasn't keen on doing that. I said that's not his job, it's our job to do that. And additionally I was thinking, if there was to be some confrontation, negative reaction, or some higher level emotion in the community, and I needed to re-engage with them to do that, he would be my ace up my sleeve to bring him back out. I didn't want the emotion and anger from the family receiving the news from us that Kumanjayi died, and Derek to be there and be associated with police. I wanted him off to the side, and he would be a valuable asset to come back and engage with them again.
And that was also, was it not about ensuring that protecting his relationship with the community of Yindaroo in an ongoing way? Oh,
definitely. He's still part of the community. We knew he was related to Kumanjayi, I believe, and the thing was I just wanted him distanced from that for a little bit if we could. He did an outstanding job the night before, and now it's time for us to do our job.
Sergeant, you recorded that conversation on body-worn footage. I'm about to play it to you, but perhaps for the benefit of the families and anyone looking on, it is distressing footage. It's approximately 8 minutes long, I think, Your Honour. You refer to the deceased, I think by the name Aaron.
Yeah, I stuffed the name up, yes.
So that's just a warning for any family members. Perhaps before we play this, you were present obviously, but Sergeant Zhang was also present.
Yes, the Sergeant Frost, Sergeant Zhang and myself were the 3 people with that.
Thank you.
You know. That's all right, Eddie. That's all right. Yeah, so when she comes, Julia will speak to her.
I don't talk to him. And not only that, he was sitting down there in my yard here with a machine gun.
Who?
South Korean. On your feet. My son said responsible. And my little son was playing inside. And my grandson was playing inside.
Yeah, but
I'm the one that helped these
yeah,
people.
we can talk about that after. Yep.
I don't get it.
You know what we're here for this morning. Eddie, let's focus on that. Yep. Julie, want to speak to her?
I think you can tell us.
You want me to tell? So,
There's no bit of a doubt on it.
yeah, my name's Sergeant King. I've come down from Darwin, okay? So the reason I've come down is because what happened last night. And the reason I've come down is to make sure that if anything happens, we don't want anyone else to get hurt, be it the community or police, okay? So unfortunately, with what happened last night, poor Aaron has passed away, okay? He's been taken to Alice Springs. He's gone to Alice Springs, okay? And then they're going to do the forensics and the investigation from there. Alright? The policeman who was involved, who shot Aaron, he's gone. He flew out last night. He's no longer here. Alright? So he'll be dealt with by our investigators and the coroner and all the rest of it from that side of things.
We want to bear justice.
Yeah, Mrs. I understand, but I know it's, and my condolences, I'm sorry for that one. I wasn't here, I didn't see it, but I've had to come down to make sure no one else gets hurt. And it's really, really important. Terry's in charge, man. He's the boss man for this. He's a forward commander. I'm working for him. The reason TRG are here is because we have the beanbag shotgun and other stuff to stop people when they're riding. When I was down here for the riots 2009 when the houses were burnt, when Joe's mob, I was here for that. I used to work in Alice Springs. I've been working out here, alright? So I've been out here and I understand the problems that's going to come from this. But it's really, really important from you as family that you work with us to try and resolve this so we don't want any more people getting hurt. Okay? Okay?
If you have any questions, we have a meeting. I'm happy to talk about it. But the last thing I want to see is anyone else get hurt. And these boys are here to make sure everyone is safe. I'm terribly sorry for what has happened. We want to talk about it. And also we can arrange for our bosses to come here and talk about it. Or senior police officers.
But it's important for all of you, Bob, before you get that anger, before you get that hurt, you come to the police station and talk to us, yeah? I don't want 20 or 30 people coming up with sticks and bars and getting upset and everything else because no one's going to. You come and talk to us. If you're not happy with what Terry says, or Julie or me, I'll be ringing Alice Springs and we'll get someone higher up to come. Yeah? And maybe even someone from Darwin to come and speak to you. But it's important we talk about this, yeah? Because everybody's paying for this one, even police, because this is going to cause problems for us, for everybody. Yeah?
It was never our intention. We didn't want this happen. But it's very unfortunate.
You said they was just going to arrest him.
That's exactly
You said they was going to arrest him.
Lottie, like I said, we are your
I'm
local
happy for
police,
you.
all right? We're your local police. We are here to help you.
Yeah, but Lottie, I have to point out that police
policeman was stabbed, so he had to go to hospital as well, okay? So there were other things that happened. No one knows exactly what happened, except Aaron and the people there. We'll find out what happened. But we can't just start guessing and making story up what we think happened. It's important we find out what really happened, okay? So the reason that policeman did what he did was because he thought he was going to die, because he got stabbed. So he had to go to hospital in Alice Springs to get looked at as well. Okay, so it isn't a case of he's shooting for no reason. That is not the case. Alright? It's not a no reason one.
Do you remember what happened with my two members? Our
Yes,
local members.
I
You
saw
saw
that.
it for your own eyes.
I didn't really see
ads.
the whole thing, I just
I
woke up
know,
from
I
my
know.
sleep.
And we can, that's what happened to my members, and he did the same, a similar thing to the Darwin, the Alice Springs members that came as well, which is unfortunately what happened in this case. So.
But then again, when I heard you say that they was going to bring a task force in here to be able to look for him and hunt him down like a dog,
No, that's.
you said, oh, they might be able to shoot him too.
No, I didn't.
And that was
I remember it.
the reason they come is to
Lottie,
find him and apprehend him safely.
My granddaughter saw it, what was happening, and she'll have a lot of consequences about that.
So were you there last night, Lottie? Were you with?
She was walking down the road.
Because the detectives from Alice Springs are in town. They're here now. They are going to want to speak to family. They are want to speak to witnesses who saw it. So if you know the people who were at the house last night who saw what happened, it's really important. You can ask them to come to the police station. Detectives have put them in a room by themselves. I don't speak to them. Julie, Terry doesn't speak to them. Detectives speak to them all by themselves. So it's really important we get their story. So if you know who they are, get them to come to the police station, yeah?
Can we go and talk to somebody when someone is there?
Alright, so
You can go to, yeah.
Can you come with us?
No, I just go look for work.
I think you can pause
And
it
I'm
there,
gonna
Your Honour.
sit down for 2 months no work.
we don't know.
At this point in the conversation, am I correct to say that Eddie Robertson suggested that you go to house 511?
Yeah, so I started picking up, we'd passed the message on, it wasn't going to help being there any longer, and I then needed to start doing, start talking to the family. So I was saying to Eddie, we need to go, and the aim was to go to the mother's house and go and speak to where the mother was, that house there. And there's twofold. One is to inform her as well, but also to seek permission to get the house where the shooting occurred so we can establish a crime scene.
And you spoke to Kumanjayi's mother?
I think when there's body worn of that, in fresh memory, we pulled up and Derek was there and we spoke to Derek. I spoke to Kumanjayi's grandfather, I felt a little bit. And then I think we spoke to Eddie and they gave us permission to go to the house and secure the crime scene because I thought that was extremely important to try and give an opportunity to try and grab that.
Just want to ask you a couple of questions about what we heard in that conversation.
Can I ask you just before we go, did anyone else have their body worn video of that?
I would suspect there that Julie Frost and Sergeant Zhang would have their body worn as well.
And I think I heard you say that you in fact had your body worn video activated at the second house.
Yes, yeah, there's a short one where Eddie actually took us to 511 and I said, we don't want to be here, we want to be at the next one. But I had it on when we spoke to family, that one as well.
And that's something that you would still have available and be able to put.
Yeah, they've provided that this morning, yes.
Thank you. I want to ask you two questions about things that were said during that conversation. The first one is, at one point you said you were talking about Constable Rolf's interactions with Kumanjayi Walker. I think you might have referred to a pair of scissors, but certainly you said he got stabbed, or words to that effect, and he thought he was going to die. Where had that information come from?
Well, I knew he'd been stabbed once we got to the station. I was informed before we left Darwin. And when we got to the station, I think I asked what the weapon was and someone said a pair of scissors.
Did you assume that he must have thought that he was going to die, or did someone actually say those words to you?
Oh, I can't recall. I know I asked what the injury was and they said that he'd been stabbed in the shoulder. I think I said, was it life-threatening? And they said no. But I think I probably put a bit of context on that. If I was a police officer being stabbed, how I felt that I would have been. So I guess the aim there was to try and say there's a lot more to this. And Aboriginal people, when you talk to them and they start saying no reason, if I try and explain to them, there's a lot of other factors here. He didn't just walk into a house and just shoot him in cold blood, so to speak. Just listen to us, take on the terrible news that you lost a family member, but we needed a bit of narrative out there about how it happened, because I'm really conscious of the Bush Telegraph and how it works. And I just didn't want them to think, to go out that it wasn't what it was.
The other comment was one that Lottie Robertson made, and I think it was directed to Sergeant Julie Frost, and she said something to the effect of, you said, I'm assuming on the 6th or 7th, that the IRT would come out and hunt him down like a dog.
Yes.
Do you remember hearing that?
I remember seeing it just now, yes.
Can you recall any conversations that you had with Sergeant Frost about that interaction after what we saw and what he went through?
No, it's the first I even heard of it when I was present that morning.
Those are my questions.
Thank you, Your Honour. Can I just grab my...
Absolutely.
Thank Sergeant, my name is Mullins. I appear on behalf of the Brown family.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mullins.
You spoke about the TRG, and am I correct in saying that it is a paramilitary type organisation?
I wouldn't refer to it as a paramilitary organisation, no.
That wasn't the term that you used?
Well, I don't recall.
In any case, I think when you were talking about discipline, you suggested that discipline was important.
Yes.
And the hierarchy of control was important.
Yes, definitely.
It was important that people follow their orders.
Yes.
And that leadership is important.
Yes.
Is it the case that the sergeant who is in charge, or the officer in charge of the operation, is primarily responsible for the management of the behaviour of the members of the IRT?
So the OSC of Yunamu or the OSC of Alice Springs?
No, I'm talking about the TRG.
No.
No? So who's primarily responsible for the people who are operating as part of the TRG?
The IRT fall under Southern Command, ultimately the commander of this region.
And who is their direct report?
Sorry, Mr. Mullins.
Who is their direct report?
Who direct report?
Who do the members of the IRT directly report to?
Well, I think at that stage the IRT were reporting to Sergeant Bowens in an IRT perspective, and then they would go through the station sergeant, then to the superintendent, then to the commander.
Sorry, did I say IRT? I meant TRG.
Oh, sorry.
Who did the TRG directly report to?
The TRG reports to the OIC, then goes to the superintendent, then through the commander and to the assistant commissioner. Yeah.
And is the OIC of the TRG a sergeant?
No, he's a senior sergeant.
Senior sergeant,
Yes.
all right. So both the IRT and the TRG members report to a sergeant. One's a senior sergeant and one's a sergeant.
No, well, so I'm a bit confused. The TRG have sergeants in the unit as team leaders.
Right.
And then they report to the OIC being the senior sergeant. It goes from there. The IRT members, it was very tricky because, Your Honour, they're normal general duties police officers and they respond back to their sergeant and their patrol group. They might be members that work in prosecutions, they might work in traffic. Then they respond back to their sergeant in that area they work through to the OIC of the station. In relation to an IRT capacity, that would then fall under the team leader, then would walk under potentially the forward commander. Sergeant Bowens, as the leader of IRT at that stage, would work through their training, their equipment, or stuff like that.
All right, the reason I ask is this. This was a death in custody?
This matter, definitely.
Yes. The death of Kumanjayi Walker was a death in custody?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
And you're aware of the general order relating to death in custody?
I'm familiar with it.
And you're familiar with the obligation of a member to segregate from all other witnesses, including other police after the incident?
Yes.
And obviously segregation in this situation was quite difficult because the members were to some extent confined to the police station.
Yes.
But ultimately, members were obliged to segregate until such time as they had been interviewed. Is that right?
Ultimately, yes, if they could.
Right. So once they returned to Alice Springs, for example, there shouldn't have been any meetings until they had all been interviewed.
Yes, ideally, yeah. Their chain of evidence should have been collected. But I think when I got there, I was conscious of that, because I still had IRT members on scene who had been involved in this. So I spoke to Frost what she'd done with that, and then apparently Constable Rolf's gun and everything had been secured, which was fine. I think I spoke to them and said, look, you're still here, you're working for us, but don't talk about the incident anymore. And I think we broke them up into different teams with different rosters. And I believe they were interviewed that night.
So is it the case that you gave instruction to the IRT members not to communicate?
Yes. They'd already received that already by Sergeant Frost, and I think I just confirmed it.
And as time wore on, who was the person responsible for maintaining that segregation? Was that Sergeant Bowens?
On the scene or back in Alice Springs?
Back in Alice Springs.
Back in Alice Springs, it would have fallen to the OSC of the police station, the senior sergeant.
Would that be Sergeant Bowens?
No.
Now, you've mentioned during the course of your statement and evidence that you had planned to take equipment to manage the community. There's a document, and can the witness please see, it's document 7-77, which is the statement, and what I have is PDF page 23. Now, this document you can see on the screen, it's headed Northern Territory Police Emergency Action Orders Civil Disorder Incidents. Is that a document that is pro forma?
Yes.
And what's it designed to do?
That's an order that we have within the Territory Response Group to cover off our response in relation to civil disorder incidents.
And is that completed proactively, as in before the order is executed?
Ideally, yes. In some circumstances, we may deliver those orders at a concept to the tactical commander or the OIC because they're flying into a situation, but where they can. So these orders here were delivered after we arrived on scene.
And do they authorise you to use force in certain circumstances?
Yes, they do, but it's more about the planning on how we're going to respond to inform the forward commander that if we were to have an incident, this is what we planned on doing, and the forward commander ultimately approves that plan.
And do you prepare this progressively?
Yeah, so we might fill out parts of it, bits and pieces, and as the incident progresses and goes on, we may add more to it, and we come up with a better plan as we go on.
So can we just scroll down? The date of it's 9 November 2019. And we can see there's reference to the forward commander and the tactical commander, which is you.
Yes.
And then on the next page,
emergency action. Yeah.
We can see the situation, which is a member of the IRT has shot a 19-year-old Aboriginal male, etc. And it says the Yuendamu community has reacted to the death, and it is anticipated that potential hostilities toward police could occur. So you're identifying that as a possibility?
Correct.
If we scroll down to the next page, please. And that's a photograph of the Yuendamu community.
That's correct. Yep.
Go down to the next page, please. Now, the mission to prevent serious harm to any person. And then if we can scroll down to the bottom half of that page and the execution, etc. And then onto the next page. These are some of the things that will be utilised in order to do that. Is that right?
Some of the options we have to use. I'm not saying they would be utilised, I'd say some of the options we had, yes.
And is that, do you have some of this equipment with you?
On that night, so I think I'll take you back to the date, it said the 9th, that's not correct. I think this was signed by forward commander being Sergeant Pace. So we would have had something like this in place in an informal capacity, and then this was written up later on. But we never had it with us that night. We never received any type of that capacity until very early, I think, when the Alice Springs team or vehicle arrived with some munitions we had in Alice Springs, or when the police plane flew down that mid-morning.
All right. Now, I don't want you to, I think another lawyer is going to ask you some questions about that, but if we go to the next page, can I just without taking you, I'll take it to you in a moment, but you actually signed this document yourself
Yes.
at, I'll just get the exact time, 11:58 on the 11th of November.
That's correct.
Moving on to the next page, we can see the local police, and these are the people who've been briefed. And we can see the reference there to ACPO Derek Williams has been spoken to and has passed on the less lethal capability. Traditional owner and grandfather of deceased Eddie Robertson spoken to and less lethal options explained.
Yes.
Was that the conversation you had with Eddie that we saw on the screen, where you explained the less lethal options?
No. No. When Eddie came to the police station, we asked him to view the body. That's when I explained to him that I'd been down there before to try and put some relevance. I wasn't just some person who came from Darwin and didn't understand everything. I was trying to say I've been here before. And I spoke to him briefly about some of the options we have, because even he was concerned that hostilities could occur.
Was he concerned about the use of even the less lethal options?
I didn't express that to me, that I recall, no.
All right, go to the next page. And then continue on through to the next page after that, please. So we see the team leader. What's RV mean?
Rendezvous point.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we go down, scroll down, please. So we can see arrest team will be responsible for arrest of any person and subsequently searching and placement in a caged vehicle.
Yes.
Munitions will consist of TRG members armed with chemical and impact munition options, etc.
Yes.
And then Overwatch will consist of TRG members with primary weapons. The main role of the Overwatch is to prevent any serious or lethal harm coming to police. And there's reference there to the decision to use lethal force rests with each police officer. The EA commander should give instructions as to when the Overwatch team may be needed. Example, if the participants are turning towards police and spears are being placed in woomers. Have you seen that before?
Yes.
Toward police?
Yes.
And where was that?
Paul Keats, Warramianga, no, it's not Warramianga, but Willara, I've seen it. Good Island, I've seen it.
What year was that?
Paul Keats was ongoing from 2012 to 16. Good Island, I think we went to an incident there in about 2015. Willara, I can't recall.
Ever seen it at Unimu?
Unimu, in 2010, they were armoured weapons, but they weren't putting spears in woomers. That case there, all their aggression was turned towards family in the house. So it wasn't against police.
Let's go down to the next paragraph. It must be noted that in nearly all civil disorder incidents, most weapons are those of handheld in nature, and spears are often used. So you were concerned about the use of spears, that's right?
Definitely, yes.
Was there any information that you had at that time that any single person had brandished a spear?
No.
Was there any information you had at that time that a single person had brandished any weapon whatsoever?
I don't recall, no. I asked when the crowd was at the police station seeking earlier in the night, were they armed? And then people were saying they had, I think someone said they looked like they had some nullas or something, word to that effect, I can't recall. Then I was informed that the convoy taking Alice Springs members from the airport to the police station had been robbed and the nurse had been injured, so I knew they'd done that.
All right, so then going through to the next page, we just have the team taskings. And just at the bottom of that page, just so I understand these distances, depending on the intentions of the crowd, but if it is believed that the crowd is violent and intent on harming police, the following actions will be implemented. 50 metres from the compound, use of visible lasers from M4s and verbal communication for crowd to stay back. That's right.
Well, I should probably change the will to may. Again, I must stress, Your Honour, this was a plan as a preemptive plan. Doesn't mean we were definitely going to do it. It was just there to provide some structure in case we were confronted with a violent incident and some options available to us.
35-metre deployment of CS SCAT and 40mm direct impact munitions and pepper ball.
Yes.
20-metre deployment of 12-gauge beanbag munitions, deployment of hand-thrown grenades.
Yes.
Less than 20 metres, all less lethal options and lethal force if warranted.
That's correct.
Now, I understand that, I think at the top paragraph, It's in that first dot point, 50 metres from crowd, use of visible lasers from M14s and verbal communication for crowd to stay back. What would that be?
What do you mean?
Yes.
So if we had credible intelligence, a group was coming towards a police station, they're armed, and we would get insight through traditional elders, through Eddie or through Derek, that they're extremely unhappy. We've had people come in from other communities, they're coming to the police station. That's where that's coming from. So if they're walking down the street and they're armed and they're angry, we would communicate with them to stay back. We would try and enforce some form of negotiation through elders or people we identified to keep their distance. If they continued on, the idea of the visible laser was people to see that on them would be a lot less than lethal option to say, just keep your distance and allow us some time to maintain communication.
In terms of maintaining communication, how are you going to translate that to Warlpiri?
How to Warlpiri?
Yeah, how are you going to translate that to Warlpiri, given that English was not the first language for many of the people?
Well, it was the same option while we took Eddie to tell the death message. We would use either Eddie or Derek or other people who were there. If we had no option and we had no local communities, we would have to rely on English.
So there was no plan for translating that to Warlpiri, is that right?
The plan would be relying on Derek or Eddie or other community elders if we had identified them, to use them, if they were present.
Well, you'd need to give the warning in Warlpiri, wouldn't you? If Warlpiri was not if English was not the first language of many of the community members?
Oh, look, it's an interesting point, but I've been to a significant number of civil services throughout the Northern Territory and for a whole range of reasons, and I haven't had a major issue in communicating them with English to understand what they needed to or not to.
Now, the information you relied upon for the development of your plan, and we can take that down now, please, but I think it will be used later. As I understand it, emerged firstly from your conversation with Assistant Commander Gill. That was the first time you received information, is that right?
When he rang me at home, yes.
Yes. Now, am I right to say that did you say in your evidence you did not know that Kumanjayi Walker was deceased when you arrived?
That's correct.
Are you sure about that?
Well, I'm not 100% sure, but I think in my body worn before I left, I think I say that he'd been shot and he'd been taken to the clinic. Yeah. And I don't recall whether I was confirmed that he had been deceased, and if he was, I didn't believe he was still in the community.
Well, it was just in your evidence you said that, as I understand it, and I don't have a real-time transcript, but that everything changed for you after you arrived at the police station and you realised he was dead.
Your Honour, I think in fairness the question was it a surprise that the body was still there?
Everything changed. There was a combination. One, that he was deceased, and two, that he was still at the station.
That was my recollection of the evidence. It's just that in your statement you say, paragraph 2, first line, the next call from Gill was that the person shot was now deceased.
Look, you're right, he might have told me he's deceased, but my evidence before I was speaking was about the surprise of seeing him still at the station.
Okay, so it was him being at the station. Was it what worried you, not that he was deceased?
Well, obviously, both. You know, the male had now died. Kumanjayi had died, so of course it was a concern. But now that had just been aggravated by the fact that he was still in the community.
When you arrived at about 1:15 a.m, you travelled from the airport to the police station?
That's correct.
And was your vehicle or any of your vehicles pelted with rocks?
No, they weren't.
Did you see any people on the road?
No, I didn't.
Did you see any people outside the police station?
No, there wasn't.
So at least at the time that you arrived, things were quiet?
Yes, definitely.
And there's no apparent or threat at that point in time of anybody breaching the police station?
Not that I was informed, no.
Now, you then had some conversations, as I understand it, with people at the police station?
Yes.
And that included Officer in Charge Frost, that you've described?
Yes.
And then in due course, you had a telephone conference with, is it Commissioner Nobbs?
No, Superintendent Nobbs.
I apologise, Superintendent
Acting
Nobbs.
Assistant Commissioner West.
And at paragraph 11 of your statement, you summarised the various things that you were told, and you've described them in your evidence, including that ACPO Derek Williams had spoken consistently to the crowd and managed to defuse the situation.
That's correct.
And it was identified in that conversation that members were ambushed with rocks when they were bringing the vehicles back from the airport the first time a plane had landed earlier in the evening.
That's correct.
Now, you say this in your statement. I got the impression that everyone was just, this is at paragraph 11, page 7. You need not bring it up. I got the impression that everyone was just, holding pattern until TRG and crime forensics arrived on scene. I could sense the tension of all the members present, and that we're expecting the whole community to return at any minute and pretty much storm the station. Now, why? First of all, did you think that?
What, that the impression they're in a holding pattern, or the impression they're going to storm the station?
The whole community was going to return at any minute and pretty much storm the station.
I guess the fear was when I found out Kumanjayi was still in the station, and I think I said to them, what's going to happen if they find out? I said, if they find out, they're going to come back. And if they come back, their behaviour may be unpredictable. And that's where that concern came from.
And had you ever experienced that situation before?
Being besieged in a police station?
No, where there had been a body in the station and the community had come back and stormed the station.
Not when they stormed the station, but I've been present numerous times when we've had a body present and trying to show family, and we've had family members come up and being extremely emotional, extremely agitated, and violence has occurred.
And what sort of emotion were they demonstrating when they attended the station on these other occasions?
Well, the one in the Daly River, there was a crocodile attack where an Aboriginal male was killed by a crocodile. We recovered the body, returned it back to the Daly River Police Station. I had the wife come in and ID the body so we would get funeral service to take it. I was back in the station, I was typing up some notes and I heard more yelling, and it wasn't sorry business. I can tell the difference. I said that's different. I've walked out and what's happened is family from Pepanati have come out and have realised the wife has seen the body before her and they've actually started fighting. There was a lot of weapons being thrown, there was equipment and vehicles being damaged. So that was the case. One instance where when things can go from one side to the other very, very quickly, purely for the fact of having a deceased person.
So when Eddie at 2:50 a.m. during the course of a conversation with you indicated, I'm sorry, that should be 4:50 a.m., paragraph number 26.
So what page was that?
Page 10.
So there's no page numbers on this document. What paragraph? Sorry, I'll find it.
26.
26, yep, good.
So Eddie attended the station at 4:50 a.m.
Yep,
and you say he was amicable and calm
that's correct.
and said that he understood what was going on but refused to see the body.
That's correct.
And did you understand that he refused to see the body for cultural reasons?
I think it was a combination between cultural reasons, and he didn't want to be put in a position where he would, they would ask, and their family would say, "You saw him, but I didn't see him." So I have been extremely conscious of the fact of there is a hierarchy of how that works in Aboriginal culture, who gets to see who. So I respected his decision when he said no.
Well, now during the course of that conversation, there seems to have been some discussion between you, Terry Zhang, and Eddie Robertson. And you state in your statement at line 4, so I read the sentence from the second line. He explained his relationship to him, that's Eddie, and we explained that the police officer involved had left Yunamu, and that the reason he discharged his firearm that that he was in fear of his life. Words to that effect refer body-worn video. Now, do you have that body-worn video?
Yes.
You have it here?
I've submitted this morning, yes.
All right.
Yep,
so is that the second body-worn video that you've given that Council Assisting referred to?
I think there's about 6 body-worn videos in total, and they've all been supplied.
All right. Let me ask this question. You understand that the term "feared for his life" is a subjective term.
Definitely. And I was, like I said to Your Honour earlier, I was just putting that in perspective. If I was a police officer being stabbed, how I would have felt. I can't talk for how Constable Rolfe would have felt, but that was summarising.
Well, isn't the effect of that statement that the threat from Kumanjayi Walker was so great that the constable in question discharged his firearm because he feared for his life?
Exactly right. That's what I anticipated.
Yeah. And that was not true, to your knowledge?
Well, as a police officer being stabbed,
again, I would feel fearful. And if Constable Roll felt justified in firing his firearm, he must have felt in fear of his life, otherwise he wouldn't have done it.
Well, that was your... Well, I'm sorry. You're saying he must have felt in fear for his life, otherwise he would not have done it.
Well, yes, because as police officers with our training and where we are, we know we deploy firearms for lethal threats and to protect ourselves or others. So for him to discharge his firearm, again, an assumption, I admit, my assumption would be that he must have felt the need to discharge his firearm because him or someone else was under immediate threat.
And do you accept, though, that you did not know at that point in time that that was factually true?
No, absolutely. Yeah,
It's simply an assumption.
yes, exactly right.
And it's an assumption that you have made and conveyed to the family of the deceased.
Yes.
And can I suggest to you that you've conveyed that assumption because you wanted to justify the best you could the shooting?
Oh, Your Honour, I don't exactly think so. I think I was just trying to put the narrative down there. Again, as you see when I was talking to the family the next morning, that wasn't what we call a no-reason shoot. There'd been an incident where a police officer had been injured and as a result he discharged his firearm. I was just trying to communicate with Eddie that circumstances had occurred resulting for Constable Rolfe to discharge his firearm. Those circumstances will be investigated later on. And I was just trying to convey with him that if I was in that same position, that I may have done the same as a police officer.
Are you saying that you considered it was appropriate for you to put, in your words, a narrative out there?
No, on reflection, I agree that probably I could articulate it a little bit better.
All right. Now, you had a meeting at the basketball courts. I'll be quick, Your Honour. I know my 20 minutes is up. You had a meeting at the basketball courts that you attended?
There was two. Which one are you referring to?
And one of them had 300 people there.
They both did. So we're talking about the one with Acting Assistant Commissioner Murphy or Commissioner Jamie Chalker?
Well, it's the one referred to in your statement.
I attended both community meetings.
In any case, those meetings were calm?
No. They weren't calm meetings.
Was there any violence?
There wasn't any violence. No, there's a large amount of emotion agitation there, but there wasn't any physical violence. No.
Now, at any time did you observe any attempt by any person from the community to breach the compound?
No.
Any person attempt to assault a police officer?
No.
Any person assault a police officer?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
Any person attempt to breach the police station?
No.
Any person attempt to breach the police station door without first knocking?
No.
Did you observe the elders maintaining calm the best they could?
Yes, I'll have to say that at the basketball courts there was some agitation by them. That was understandable, though.
When you visited Eddie Robertson, and I think another counsellor will ask you about that, when you visit Eddie Robertson at his home and Lottie Robertson in the body-worn video that we've seen, you actually had two vehicles stationed about 50 to 100 metres away?
That's correct.
And did those officers in those vehicles have assault rifles?
Yeah, the TRG members were kitted up with all their equipment, yes.
And did you think that the community might find the presence of guns distressing, given that a community member had been shot by police with a gun?
Yes, exactly right. But that's why I made them stay in the vehicle. They didn't get out.
But there were many officers over the ensuing days about the town, about the Yuendamu community, with rifles that were visible, weren't there?
Yes, there were. So I'm happy to explain on that. So I was at the crime scene. We established the crime scene and I stayed there for probably about 2 hours, Your Honour, with detectives and some members there, just in case family came up. Because when we established the crime scene, there was some concern from Commander Curry as to whether the police could be confrontational. So I stayed there. I arranged for general duties members to come and replace as security in the crime scene, and I returned to the station. I was not aware they were carrying long arms. If I was aware, I would have told them to put them away because there's no requirement for it. So I'll take responsibility in that and not conducting a proper handover with those members because we passed in vehicles. I didn't anticipate they would use it, carry them in the public view. There was no requirement for it. And I'll just put that down to probably just a lack of understanding with junior members not appreciating the impact.
Well, do you understand that the impact of the fear to members of the community in circumstances where one of their own members had been shot by a police officer with a gun.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you, Your Honour. Nothing further.
Does anyone else have questions?
I see you on, I'm up for a while, so I'm not really waiting.
Is there anyone else? Is there anyone else going to be short?
Relatively, for the Walker Lane Robertsons.
Yes. Well, how about we try and get the shorter one, and it is Mr.
Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Hearn, yes.
Officer, to be clear, you became aware of the fact that Kumanjayi had been shot and was deceased prior to boarding the plane, is that correct?
Well, that would appear so from my statement, yes.
And upon arrival at the police station, that was something which A, surprised you and at least altered the prioritisation of the tasks ahead of you?
What surprised me was the body was still present. Of Kumanjayi's body was still present. That was what surprised me.
Did you learn early on that the families had not been informed about the death?
As soon as I walked in, I saw Kumanjayi in the cells. I walked in, I think in a very short period of time, I asked Sergeant Frost, does the family know? And she said no.
Okay. And did you understand from that point onwards it would become your responsibility in order to inform the families?
Not my direct responsibility, no, but it would be the responsibility of police, yes.
In that regard, I understand that you sent Sergeant Frost home very shortly after 2:06 a.m. due to her exhaustion?
Yeah, I think it was about an hour. We had the talk with Superintendent Nobbs and Assistant Commissioner Worst. We went out and I addressed everyone and I explained how we're breaking the people up to manage fatigue, and then I said, go home, you need to rest, because she was going to be instrumental the next morning when we spoke to family.
Just in regards to the conversation or the phone call that happened with Superintendent Nobbs and Assistant Commissioner Worst, was Sergeant Frost a part of that conversation?
Sorry, say it again.
In regards to the conversation that you had with Superintendent Nobbs and Assistant Commissioner Worst...
Yes, she was present.
She was present?
Yes.
What did you do during those early periods at the police station to inform yourself about relevant cultural matters attendant to dealing with the family?
Well, the first thing I wanted to do was confirm the point of contact being Eddie Robinson.
Okay.
So
and can I ask, how did you do that?
It was from the conversation on the phone with Superintendent Nobbs and Assistant Commissioner Worst. They mentioned Eddie, and Julie had already mentioned how effective Eddie was. And, how that was the point of contact. And I just said, are you guys happy that he is our person? And I said, yep, cool, happy with that. You guys, it's your station, I know.
Did you say how effective he was initially?
Did I ask?
Did you say that you were told how effective
No, I meant Derek Williams, sorry. I meant how effective Derek Williams was. I asked whether Eddie Robertson was the person. I asked, is there anyone else? We could get a couple of elders together to provide a multi-family approach, and they said no. As far as they were aware, Eddie was the person to talk to.
Okay. But you must have understood that he was not the extent of Kumanjayi's family.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So did you take any steps to identify other families or other family groups that you may need to communicate with?
Yeah, I asked Sergeant Frost if there's anybody else.
Okay. And did you receive that information?
Yeah, they pretty much said Eddie seems to be the person we need to talk to.
Okay. Again, you must have known that he did not represent all of Kumanjayi's family groups.
Exactly right, but I don't know the town, I don't know the families, and if I have a sergeant and a superintendent and a commander telling me this is the person you need to talk to, I wasn't going to question them.
After Sergeant Frost was sent home, did you have any local police or police with local knowledge by your side during the hours of darkness, I suppose?
There would have been someone. I can't recall whether the Unimu members were split between two groups, or one went down to rest and one stayed on, but I can't recall whether it's Alfeo or Hand or whoever was there. There would have been someone. I would have made sure there would have been one local member available to ask questions on.
In the conversation that you had with Superintendent Nobbs and Assistant Commissioner Worst at about 2:06 a.m, one of the things that was traversed was when to tell the community about the death.
That's correct.
Now, you've said that Sergeant Frost was a part of that conversation. Are you sure about that?
Yeah, I've got body-worn footage. She's there.
What was the when you were discussing when to tell the community? What were the factors that were being considered or informing that decision?
The first point was that we weren't going to tell the community until Kumanjayi had been removed from Yuendamu. That was the first one, straight away.
Why?
Because of the fear, like I mentioned before, that they found that he was at the station. It was likely they were going to come to the station, which means they were going to likely want to come in and see him, and we weren't going to be able to permit that.
What else?
Once that was done, we talked about how we were going to communicate that through that, and then there was obviously some discussion on the ID of Kumanjayi to confirm it was, and then that turned towards we'll go use Eddie to do the ID, and then potentially ask Eddie for advice on who we tell and when we tell them, which is what we did when he came in.
In the list of matters that you set out as having been discussed during that conversation, you do not say specifically that there was any conversation about when to tell the family.
I think the only thing we mentioned was once Kumanjayi had left, then we would work out the plan of when. I was conscious of, I think we discussed briefly about waking people up at 4:30 or 5 in the morning and wait until daylight. Everybody's quiet, everyone's asleep. So I think most likely I personally was aiming for first light, but we were still at that point waiting for forensics to get back to us that they would finished, done their examination, and the body, Kumanjayi, could actually be released.
So were you waiting for first light, or were you waiting for the body?
I was waiting for forensics to finish first, and we anticipated that would be done by first light. My aim would be to go to family at first light. I wasn't comfortable doing it at night time, but if the forward commander and I said, no, we want to do it now, then I would have.
If I suggest to you that community safety was the dominant consideration in determining when to inform family, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
You've mentioned that there was a big push for identification, and that was, I understand, inconsistent with the position you took that informing the families and the community should wait until the family had left the community.
Yeah, I'm not a detective, but I spoke to detectives there and said, is there an urgency to ID the body? We know he's got extended family in Alice Springs, or we could arrange for transport for family to Alice Springs. So why don't we just let forensics do their thing and then go? And they said it's a valid point, but we should make the effort. And I said, yep, I'm happy with that.
I just want to ask you about some interactions or some communications with Eddie Robertson. At paragraph 22 of your statutory declaration, you mention that Sergeant Zhang called Eddie Robertson at some point, not stated, but some point prior to 4:08 a.m.
No, we were going to call him and ask him to come to the station, and that paragraph 22 is reflecting about, we discussed with Superintendent Jackson, if he didn't answer the phone as to whether we're going to go forward and knock on the door and speak to him personally and ask him to come to the station.
Well, so just the second sentence of that paragraph reads, Zhang had spoken to him earlier, so we agreed a possible option. Is that in reference to a conversation with Jackson or a conversation with Robertson?
Oh, look, if Zhang had spoken to him earlier, maybe he told me he'd spoken to him earlier, but I don't know in what capacity.
Okay. Well, if I suggest to you that there were phone calls made to Eddie, or at least conversations by phone with Eddie prior to the phone calls at about 4:40 a.m., is that something that you recall or not?
No, the first I recall that Sergeant Zhang spoke to Eddie was in that conversation which I have on body worn when we first rang him and asked him to come to the station.
Now, during that phone call, Eddie expressed some reluctance to come to the police station.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. And during that phone call, he wasn't told why he was being asked to come to the police station.
That's correct.
He asked why he was being asked to come to the police station?
I think he kept saying what it was about, and Sergeant Zhang just said, it's really important we talk to you, can you come up?
Now, Eddie was asked to make his own way down to the police station, is that right?
We offered to pick him up, but he said he would drive, from my recollection.
Well, I suggest to you that that was a contingency plan if he wasn't prepared to get himself there.
Yeah, the plan was if he didn't answer the phone, we'd drive and knock on the door and ask him to come up. And then we spoke to him on the phone. We offered to come pick him up, and he said, "No, it's all right. I'll get my wife out of bed and we'll drive there."
It was a deliberate decision to have Eddie alone in the police station when he was informed.
Because we just want to talk to him by himself. Yes.
Did you consider that perhaps the person you understood to be his grandfather might wish to have someone by his side for emotional support when receiving such information?
Yeah, so I spoke to Sergeant then about that briefly, and we said, look, when we inform Eddie of Kumanjayi passing, that if he wanted someone else to come, we would make arrangements for it, but we thought we'd just judge it on his behaviour, or his response, and from what I understood that he would take it okay. He was on side with everything, especially what he had done earlier in the night. So.
Well, just talking about the email which was put up on the screen earlier, and I won't ask that it be put up again, but there was explicit statement in that email that Eddie was to be spoken to alone.
That's correct.
Why was that?
When Aboriginal people are together and we're talking about something, sometimes they have to act a certain way or do a certain thing. And we wanted to speak to Eddie by himself just so that we could judge. I wanted to judge his response and how he was, which side of the fence he was sitting on and how he was feeling about it and whether we could use him.
Well, what do you mean, which side of the fence he was sitting on?
In sense of that, if he was willing to work with us and he understood it, we could use him and I could do what we did with him the next morning at the house. If he was very anti-police, very upset, very emotional, I wouldn't have asked him to be in a position to come to the house with Rashida and put him through that again and put him in that position. So that was where I was coming from.
Is this why police had decided that he was the point of contact, because he was going to be useful?
No, I think you'd have to speak to Assistant Commissioner Wurst or Superintendent Nobbs or even Sergeant Frost. I was told he was the person in the community and I just trusted their judgment.
Well, you formed that view yourself, did you not?
I formed the view from their information, and then once I had that conversation with him at the station, I thought he could be a good person to work with us to talk to the community.
So he was reluctant to come to the police station. He was also reluctant to see the body?
I think he was reluctant to come to the police station because we rang him so early in the morning and he was still in bed.
Well, why do you say that was the reason?
Well, because any person can wake up at 4 o'clock and coming in, and I guess he's naturally questioning, what do you want me for? So I think that's a perfectly understandable response. He was reluctant.
Did you give consideration to the possibility that there were also cultural reasons as to why he was reluctant to go to the police station to identify a body?
Well, we never told him what he was coming up for. So he didn't know he was coming to view the body. We just asked him to come and talk to us. So he may have presumed he just wanted to talk to us and find out what's going on. We may have just been asking him, hey, how's the community going?
Why was he not told on the phone?
We didn't want to tell him on the phone because we couldn't control the narrative in case he went out and started telling everyone in the community that Kumanjayi passed. And we didn't want, like we said, multiple people from the families coming to the station. We thought there'd be a better way to less impact the community in a way that we can control. And I really wanted to get some impression from Eddie how he thought the community would respond, because I've been down there before. I spoke, as we mentioned before, how...
Was that 2003?
10, I think it was. 9, 10, around about then. 2003, I was in Alice Springs as a general duties member. In 2010, I went down for the rights where the houses were, with the family in the house. So they tell me Eddie's good, Your Honour. They're saying he's the man. I've never met him, and I'm not going to want to judge a book by his cover. So if he could come to the station, I could sit down and talk to him and say, how do you think the family's going to react? How are you going? What do you think we should do from here? It allowed me valuable insight on how I could work with Eddie to try and move on from there.
Did you give any consideration as to how this information should be given to him, or who should give it to him?
The death message?
Yes.
I said to Terry, it's your job, you're the forward commander, and he actually told me he was doing it, and I was comfortable for that. And we were just going to just do it as we did in the body worn. As we said, sorry, there's Kumanjayi's passed. He's here. We would like you to see him and just give us the ID. And I think he said no, and that was perfectly fine with us.
So, in addition to his reluctance to come to the police station, I began asking you about his reluctance to view the body.
Yes.
And that's ultimately a request or something that you chose to respect after some time.
Yes.
You, in your statement, write, personally, I felt that he was trying to distance himself away from the incident. He wanted to help, but if he saw the body and then went and told family Walker was deceased, it would place him in a difficult position.
That's correct.
Did you interpret at the time that Eddie was saying that it was uncomfortable or inappropriate for him? Well, I withdraw that question. Did you understand that what his concern was being burdened with that information and the complications that would cause in terms of him having to communicate that to other people?
Yeah, exactly. Like I mentioned before, if he was there and he saw the body and due to Aboriginal hierarchy, he wasn't the person to view it first. I didn't want to put him in a position where family could accuse him, you knew, you never told us, so to speak. And I didn't want to do that because, one, it's unfair for him, and he said no. And secondly, from all indications, he gave me the impression he wanted to work with us, and I want him to work with us. I didn't want to put him in a position where he would turn around, I can't trust police, they did this to me. If that makes sense. And Your Honour, I've been to numerous instances, even with, regardless of race, where people refuse to see the body of loved ones for various reasons, and I'll respect that.
Do you think that that in fact was a reason based in culture as to why he may have been reluctant to see the body?
I think it was a case of culture. I think it's also a case of where he sat in the community, of being in that position. I think it was a combination of both.
Eddie went home or was taken home sometime around 6 o'clock in the morning. He was then asked, or was asked at some point during the morning, whether or not he would accompany police to another family member's home at a time when police were going to communicate with that family about the death.
Yeah, so when we left, when we finished our conversation at the police station, we asked him the best time to talk to and who to talk to first, to the hierarchy of people informing the death message, which what he thought was best. And he actually advised us not to tell family, and he actually gave us advice that we needed Kumanjayi to go. He says, Kumanjayi needs to leave the community before you tell them. We agreed that we would go to the house where, I think it was Rakisha, the first time we showed the body wall. We agreed to go to that one first, and then I said anywhere else, and I think he mentioned it was at 577.
Well, that's Eddie's home where Rakisha...
Sorry?
That's Eddie's home.
Is it Eddie's home?
Yes.
I don't know. I had the impression he said, because we said we would pick you up on the way, and he said, no, I'll drive and meet you there. And when we drove there, we waited a little bit and we waited around the corner. Then Eddie drove up in his Pajero, I think it was, Pajero Prado, and he got out of the car. So he drove to that location. Whether he went somewhere else after the police station, I'm not sure.
Just talking about the meeting or the attendance at the Robertson home.
Yes.
You've seen the recording of the interaction which has been played to the court.
Yes.
I'll ask you a couple of things about that. Firstly, you agree that you got Kumanjayi's name wrong.
Yes.
And you also accept that you were at least attempting to refer to him by his name.
Yes.
Do you understand that referring to an Aboriginal person by their name following their death is something which is considered to be culturally very disrespectful?
Yeah, Your Honour, it's an interesting point, because I've been to communities where I have said their name before or not, and then, of course, I wanted them to understand, to talk about who we're talking about to start with in case anything else. When you see the body-worn footage back of the crime scene, I speak to Derek Williams and I say, Derek, just to confirm, are we referring to him from now on as Kumanjayi or Arnold? He said, no, Kumanjayi. All right, cool. So I never had opportunity to clarify that. I understand, especially with that circumstance, it would have been better, one, to get the name right, but secondly, to probably refer to him as Kumanjayi. But if I walked in and said, sorry, Kumanjayi died, they might go, who? Car accident, Alice Springs or anything else? I had to try and put some reference into this instance in the first case,
I think
Do
if
you
you look
seriously think they might have been confused about who you were talking about?
well, potentially no, but I wasn't going to deal with assumptions. I wanted to get it right from the start. And when you see me talking to family at the mother's house, I don't refer to the name again.
And didn't help getting his name wrong, I suppose.
No, it didn't. No, it didn't.
Just want to ask you about the request that you made of Eddie to then accompany police to, I think it was the Browns' home.
Yes.
In paragraph 28 of your statement, you say it took a bit of convincing.
I think he's talking about convincing to attenders when we pass on the death message to family in the first instance. You're referring to 28? That's before we left the station. He was still at the police station at that time when we were talking to him about viewing the body and what to do next. There was a bit of confusion when we left that house. He took us straight to the crime scene. Is that what you're referring to, as opposed to family's house?
Because I think I got that wrong. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Break for lunch and we'll return at 5 past 2.
All said, Coronial Court sentence temporarily adjourned.
Can I just get a sense of how long everyone has been using
I reckon about now.